everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our virtual community meeting. There's a lot to catch up on. We're really excited about today's, panel and conversation. I think we're going to learn a lot of different perspective. I think it's going to be very meaningful to us and our mission and kind of like what the landscape is going to be looking like for the next 6, 12, 18 months. So very, very excited. So thank you both for, joining us. Also, just want to give a quick heads up on what's happening here in Skid Row and at the Trust as well. As everyone knows, we're really excited. We've had a very hard push in making sure that we bring on more units to house our unhoused neighbors. So we have celebrated 649 lofts and floor 401. We have a joint venture partnership with Cecil coming online in very short order. We have a team there right now that's going to bring in, hundreds of units to support the efforts that we're going through. We also have a project, in final phases called SP7. So thank you to the real estate development team, the property management team that's going through an extraordinary amount of work for the last 12 to 18 months to make sure that we were meeting the need that Los Angeles is getting a lot of attention and press for. So thank you to all of our partners that helped us go through that. And we'll make sure that we share a lot of that information. Thank you to our teams, that are out in the field, really working through the transition of opening up the economy and managing how we're going to serve our residents while simultaneously preparing for this potential variant that is on our screens right now. So thank you to everyone on the team. Thank you to all of our partners. We're going to keep sharing the work that's happening right now. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Antonio, and I'm very excited again about this panel. Thank you to both. Looking forward to the information and talk to you both soon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Antonio Lamons. It's with great pleasure that I introduce President and CEO Ken Kraft. Ken brings a unique blend of business and ministry to Hope of the Valley Rescue Mission, having served nearly 20 years as a pastor, 6 years with the Fortune 500 company, and another 8 years as a mission director of a homeless shelter. He is committed to engaging his heart and head when it comes to overseeing the work of the mission. He realizes that a successful rescue mission must maintain a balance between finances and faith, passion and purpose, and compassion and conviction. Don't expect to find Ken huddled in his office. His hands-on approach to caring for the complex needs of the homeless and hungry is a model of servant leadership to staff and volunteers. His passion is to help the least of these and assist them on the road to recovery. Ken has been blessed with 3 children, and I want to jump right in. Ken, welcome. So to start, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your background beyond what I've shared so far. I am aware that you're a pastor. How did that contribute to your success as president and CEO of Hope of the Valley?
Well, thank you. It's really a delight and a joy to be with everybody today. And, like most of us, our past tends to shape our future. And so for me, really understanding the value, the worth, the dignity of every human being, it runs deep within me. And so when I see people that oftentimes are marginalized and mistreated, I know that's not the way life should ultimately be. And so, when we say we're a faith-based organization, I now always include the word in front of faith, an inclusive faith-based organization. And that's very important because we have people that serve on our board of directors of Jewish faith, those of Muslim faith, those of Christian faith, and those of no faith. And so it's so important to me that now, especially with the humanitarian crisis that we're facing, now is not the time to build walls, but to build bridges. And we may not see eye to eye, but we can walk hand in hand. We don't have to, we can agree to disagree agreeably. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And so I think some of the things, just understanding You know, I am a Christian and I come from a Christian worldview, but I also understand how important it is that we are inclusive and that we work together to accomplish great things.
That's wonderful. Hope of the Valley created the first tiny homes community for the unhoused in Los Angeles. How did the idea come about, and how long did it take to open your first community?
You know, like so many, we want people to move into permanent, supportive, affordable housing. That is the goal. That is the desire. Most of us are familiar that back in 2016 with the passing of the Triple H bond measure. There's $1.2 billion to create 10,000 units, and everybody was cheering, yes, this is it. We're going to build the affordable housing and get people off the streets. Well, the first affordable complex did not open its doors from the Triple H funds until January of 2020. So it passed in 16. The first units didn't open until January of 2020. And that's a long period of time. And so if we learned anything, we know that the streets cannot be the waiting room for permanent housing. I wish that there was enough resource, enough land that we could, and you guys do such an amazing job of building these permanent housing and supportive housing facilities. But oftentimes they take time. One, securing the land and getting the entitlements, and then getting plans approved, and getting the resources and getting them built. And so one of the things that I personally have been very involved with is trying to come up with a concept to rapidly deploy interim housing. And I was working with the University of Southern California with their 4th year and 5th year architectural engineering students to come up with a design. And we actually came up with something that we thought might be promising. And as we had prepared the prototype and we had it sitting at one of our locations in Van Nuys, somebody had asked me, hey, have you ever heard of these folks called Pallet Shelter? And I said, no, I have not. And then she said, you may want to check them out. And I did. And they're out of Redmond, Washington. And there comes a time when if you can't beat them, you join them. And they actually had a far better product than what we had developed in partnership with the University of Southern California, because these tiny homes can actually be assembled in about 60 minutes. And these tiny homes have air conditioning, they have heating, they have 4 windows, 2 beds, storage underneath, 3 electrical outlets, and most importantly, they have a front door that locks. And so in partnership with the City of Los Angeles, and in particular, at first, Councilman Paul Krikorian, we were able to work with the council district to open up the very first tiny home community. And since that time, we then opened up the largest tiny home community in the state of California, which wasn't far from the one on Chandler. It was up at Alexandria Park. And then we opened up 2 others, one in Reseda, one in Tarzana. And then we're slated to open up another one at the end of August, which will be at Saticoy and Whitsett in North Hollywood. And then the 6th one will be off of the 110 freeway near Highland Park. And that will then actually eclipse Alexandria Park. It will be the largest one, it sounds to me like even in the nation. It'll be 117 tiny homes at that particular site at the Arroyo Seco. So, these tiny homes have their place. I look forward to the day when we can disassemble them because there will be enough housing for everybody. But until that time, one of the things I know is that if there was a natural calamity, if there was an earthquake today or tonight, that immediately the National Guard would be here, the Red Cross would be here. We would make sure that our Angelinos would not have to languish out in the elements. And yet we've been declaring homelessness a crisis for how many years, but we really have not had a FEMA-like response. And so that's what this is. It allows there to be a FEMA-like response. These tiny home sites were built in 90 days from beginning to end. And that includes all the sewer lines, the water lines, the gas lines, the power lines, because there is bathrooms. They're not in the units themselves. They're these really nice hygiene trailers. But again, this is temporary interim housing until we can then get them into permanent housing.
It sounds like you mentioned you have 6 tiny home communities. What's the total number of homes across all of the communities? And then the second part to that question is, how long can a person actually stay at one of the tiny homes?
Well, for Hope of the Valley, we finished 2020, the year 2020, with 9 shelters and 507 beds. We'll finish this year with 16 shelters, 1,542 beds. So we will add over 1,000 beds, and all but 100 of those will be tiny home beds. So in these particular sites, I mean, they're very well organized, and they are part of LASA's interim housing, and so there is a scope of required services, and from outreach and engagement to talking to people that are out in the community that are homeless and they are supposed to be within a 3-mile radius, and then once they come in, we do have case managers, we have housing navigators, mental health services, substance abuse, counseling, job training, job placement. So it has all the basic amenities that anyone would need to overcome the hurdles, the obstacles, the barriers that are preventing them from being housed. And you asked a question that many people ask, well, how long can somebody stay there? There is not a time limit on how long someone can stay there. As long as they're willing to work on their plan, which is put together between them and their case manager, then they can stay there. And we are not looking for perfection, we're looking for progress. We realize when people come in that oftentimes they've had tremendous amounts of trauma and setbacks in life. And so, we want to, are we making progress? Are we moving towards that goal of getting you into, permanent housing and, getting you document ready, and if you qualify for, if we can get you employed, getting you employed. If not, let's link you to public benefits. All the things that we have to do to make sure someone is housing ready, permanent housing ready when that opportunity comes, so we can stabilize them and get them ready. But what we have found so far, because we do have other interim housing sites, is that we found that typically will take between 4 to 6 months is what we're finding is the average length of time that somebody will stay in interim housing until we can get them into permanent housing. I know this year, we've since expanded our housing navigation team. When it was only 4 people up until a few weeks ago, we've been able to place 88 people from interim housing into permanent housing, and of those 88 this past year, 97% are still housed. So we're really thankful for that.
That's incredible. You mentioned a lot of services that are attached to the housing there. How portable is that when someone finds transition to a more stable housing situation?
Well, typically we don't have a contract for stabilization. So at that point, we do work with the lead provider in this council, or in this area, this SPA, with LA Family Housing, and we then hand them to the housing stabilizer, and they work to the best of our ability to try to keep consistent with whoever their healthcare worker was, their mental health care worker. But I think that's certainly an area that we could strengthen.
What are some of the challenges that you encounter trying to get this concept up and running?
Probably the biggest challenge is community acceptance. A number of the sites are very close to, if not in, residential areas. What happened is in 2018, Mayor Eric Garcetti declared a shelter emergency. Now, that may not sound like a big deal, but it was a game changer, because prior to the mayor declaring a shelter emergency, organizations like Hope of the Valley, we could only open up shelters in zoning that was C2 and CM, commercial zones. And you could only have 30 beds or less unless you got a conditional use permit. But to get a conditional use permit, you have to have public hearings. Everybody comes out, yells and screams, not in my backyard. And it was a very difficult proposition. But when the mayor declared a shelter emergency in 2018, which was very strategic because he was seeing how long it was taking to get the permanent housing built, and so it was a very strategic move, several things happened. Number one, organizations like Hope of the Valley, we can now build interim housing, not only in C2 and CM, but also in M1, M2, which is manufacturing buildings, which they're more plentiful and they're at a lower cost per square foot, which is great. Also, that 30-bed limit, it's gone. That's why most of the sites that we're opening now are 100 beds, 200 beds. It's in order for us to have some level of scale to really bring people in off the streets. And then the city of Los Angeles, they themselves, they can open up one of these facilities in any zoning, as long as, number one, either they own the land, or number two, they lease the land. So one of the ways we've been able to move so quickly on these initial tiny home facilities is that they are built on city-owned land, on metro land, on rec and park land, on parking lots. And with each one that's being built, we're finding ways to build them much cheaper. The first one was pretty expensive. They had to run a sewer line, almost a city block to tap into a main sewer line, and then bringing out the power. But now, some of the latest ones, the cost per square foot has dropped almost by 2/3 of what was spent on the initial ones.
And what is that coming in roughly around for per square foot?
Right now, like the newest ones are coming in, well, I don't have it per square foot, I have per unit. It's about $22,000 per unit versus the first ones were coming in more around $73,000 per unit. So, and a lot of that is just the initial ones, we weren't, even the engineers, fire and safety, people weren't quite sure, and so they had to pour the concrete pads and had to bolt them down, and now it's like they're just bolting them right to the asphalt on the parking lots, and keeping existing curbs in place. So there's some things that are being done. When there's an emergency, these particular homes would not qualify for R1 homes because they do not have a bathroom in them and they do not have running water in them. So you couldn't put one of these in your backyard and have it as an accessory dwelling unit. But this is what you would use when there's a crisis and an emergency. Get them up quickly to bring people inside. They have air conditioning. These particular units, the temperatures could be over 110 degrees or it could be below 0, and they can maintain a temperature of 65 to 75 degrees inside. They're rot resistant. They can withstand winds of over 100 miles an hour as they're bolted down. So it really is a viable solution, an affordable solution, a scalable solution, especially as we're facing a humanitarian crisis. And as I said earlier, it's not okay to allow people to languish on the streets when there's a solution that can bring them in on a temporary basis while we all work together for the permanent solution.
I want to circle back a little bit to the case management piece that you addressed with the services. So, a lot of times when people who aren't in this industry or are not familiar with how you actually help people get off the street, they think of it as the dwelling being the long and short of it, right? And so you mentioned a lot of services that the case managers are providing. How does the case management how does the case manager change their approach or services offered to residents in a bridge housing environment, if at all?
Yeah, there really isn't much change because, when we look at this continuum of care, and that's really what it is, that continuum begins with outreach and engagement. I always say you can either put a guardrail at the top of the cliff or you can put an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And unfortunately, we are more of an ambulance. But it saves so much money for individuals and heartache and pain and trauma if we could just build some really good guardrails at the top of the cliff. Sometimes helping someone stay housed is so much cheaper than letting them lose their housing and then falling to the bottom of the cliff, and then the amount of money and energy and effort to get them back up again. But unfortunately, usually by the time we get involved, they're already on the streets. They've lost a vehicle, if indeed they were dwelling in a vehicle. They've burned a lot of relationships out of desperation. Sometimes, as humans, we're survivors, and as survivors, that self-preservation is a powerful force, but oftentimes it is counterproductive to building healthy relationships. When I feel like I'm drowning, I'm going to grab that person next to me to try to help me, and unfortunately, I can do damage to them. So by the time we are working with people, we do outreach and working with other outreach and engagement teams in the initial assessment out in the field, we tell people, look, here's the benefits and here's the requirements. And so we explain to them, you're gonna get 3 meals a day, you have clothing, you have medical care, mental health care, you've got a safe place to be, in this home, and in hygiene, and we explain all the benefits. And then we say, and there are some requirements also. It's a community, and in any community there is an element and degree of structure and order, and so we have to have that. It's not a free-for-all where anyone can just do what they want, but we try to work with people. But then as soon as they come in, the first thing those case managers are doing, they're saying, do you have your birth certificate? Do you have your social security card? Do you have a state ID? And usually it's no, it's been stolen. And we say, okay, let's get that ordered right away. So that's the first thing they're doing, is they're trying to get them document ready. Why? Because they're never going to get a job. They're never going to get housing without basic essential documentation. And once they get them the documentation, and then we try to really understand what led to your homelessness. And then they try to help them understand, okay, if there's a loss of a job, and let's dig a little deeper. Was it he was just a horrible boss? Was there any part that you may have played? Is there anything we can do to help you be a better employee? And we have job specialists that are working with the residents to help them identify what areas of employment would they most likely succeed in and thrive in. And so we're working with them there. And then we do have the housing navigators. And to me, they're the rock stars. Really they are, because it's a sales job. And they have to be out in the field every day. They're trying to convince landlords that already might have full occupancy, and every once in a while a unit's coming available. They're having to convince them, well, give us a chance, and they will tell me about your client. Well, they're homeless, and so it's a hard sell sometimes, but working with them and building those relationships, and so I remember the first resident who was moving out of interim housing to permanent housing in one of the tiny homes. When he was leaving, all the other residents lined the street and just stood and clapped for him as he took his stuff and he walked out. Why? Because it was hope. And and everyone realized, if he can do it, we can do it, and that's what we've got to do, is build that level of hope. And so between case managers, housing navigators, and even we have 24-hour security on site. It is very safe. We have video monitors all over the place. Where we want, because so many have been traumatized. When they come in, we want them to know that you are safe here. And so when they see the video surveillance, they see the security guards, they see the monitors, and they can go inside their place. They can lock the door. They're completely safe, and then giving them also access to the mental health services. The Department of Mental Health comes on site, and other third-party agencies are working with the residents. So it really is a one-stop shop. I was asking one gentleman, what does this place mean to you? He's at the tiny home, and he says, "Are you kidding me? I think I won the lottery." And I talked to another guy. I said, "So what is it like for you living in this?" Because it really is a community, and they're very, very nice. And he says, "I feel like I live in my own private gated community." And I said, that's what I want to hear. We want them comfortable, but not too comfortable, because this isn't your forever home. This is your temporary home, and so let's use it for what it is, and get you ready for when that permanent housing is available. That you're one of the first in line.
Well, this is awesome. I mean, you guys are doing incredible work. There's no doubt. And I'm sure I'm seeing questions pop up in the chat, and I want to make sure that we have some time for those questions. I just want to ask you one final question before we go to the chat. And that is, what's next for Hope of the Valley, and where do you hope to accomplish in the coming year?
Well, right now, I mean, we historically, we're 12 years old. August 1st will be 12. So I had the privilege of starting the organization 12 years ago, and we started very humbly. It was a little church in Sun Valley that let us use their facility, and so we cooked and served meals. And then from there, we opened up our men's drug and alcohol recovery program, then the first of our 3 family shelters, and then a youth shelter. And as I mentioned, so by the end of this year, we'll have 16 very distinct locations, and from bridge housing to tiny homes, cabin communities. And so for us right now, we're a motto that I've always tried to live by is, if you want to be successful, find a need and fill it. And so what are the greatest needs? And, there's great organizations like Skid Row Housing Trust and LA Family Housing that are just doing such a great job on the development side, the building, the permanent housing. And we really found that one of the greatest needs was this interim housing. And so, we have, built the staff. We have about 300 staff members right now, and we have the infrastructure to, when opportunity presents itself, to be able to scale into whether it's the west side or whether, we'll be opening up the one in East LA, South LA. We're now up in the high desert. And so we just want to, respond to the need. I always tell our board of directors, I say the opportunity doesn't announce itself before it knocks. It just knocks. And either you open the door or you don't. And so we've worked hard to put ourselves in a position to be able to say yes to get as many people off the street as possible. And then, from there, we do have plans right now to actually take these tiny homes, which are currently they're only being used for single adults 18 and over, and they're 64 square feet. But I was just up at the headquarters for pallet shelters in Washington on Monday, and they now have units that are 100 square feet, another one that's 400 square feet, and one that's 800 square feet. So we have an entire plan put together for the city of Lancaster to open up a 400-bed family shelter utilizing the 100 square foot units, and they have bunk beds in them. And again, rapidly deployed interim housing until we can get them into permanent housing for families.
That's incredible. So with that, I'd love to thank you for taking this time. I've enjoyed conversing with you. And again, I want to give the listeners an opportunity to get into the conversation. So I want to thank you personally, Ken, and then I'm going to turn this over to Jet to handle the Q&A.
Thanks, Antonio. And Ken, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. I think that this is a topic that can be so misunderstood. And, we've worked very hard to connect to shelters and transitional providers and be a voice in the community saying, the very last thing Skid Row Housing Trust wants is to continue a condition where people are suffering and dying on the street. And we're inadvertently increasing the numbers of people experiencing chronic homelessness. That's the most difficult, most expensive problem to solve, and we're really thrilled to see so many new solutions coming in for the full continuum of care, so that the waiting room is not the street. So thank you for being with us and for all of your work. We do always ask guests at this meeting to take action in the form of making a gift or advocating or joining our mailing list. If you're already on our mailing list, we hope that you'll click on the button anyway and send the link to a friend or two. And with that, I will go to the Q&A. And our first question is from Rebecca Gray. And this is, I think, an important one for all of us. Such great information. Thank you for your time today, Ken. My question is about staff. What kind of staff care or training do you complete at Hope of the Valley to try to help with burnout and some of the emotional and psychological exhaustion that can come along with this work?
Yeah, and I think that's, anybody in this field knows how easy that can happen if you don't practice some level of self-care, because you're constantly giving and it's constantly being pulled out of you. And so, we really have tried to, we do have a clinical therapist on site that's also working with our staff in just dealing with, their particular issues. We try to be very, we will pay for ongoing training and schooling and education so that people can continue to better themselves in this field. We do require that you take your vacation and that you have downtime, because we're not going to solve this problem overnight. We didn't get here overnight, and people need to have that self-care. But one of the things that I would like to see more is as a CEO, is a systematic approach to training. I know our chief programs officer and our senior directors, they work very hard to make sure that our staff is trained. But I would love to see that's just as a younger agency, that's something that we haven't developed in a way that I'm satisfied with. So hopefully in the months and years ahead, we can be more intentional about that.
I think that is a question that leaders throughout our industry just have got to keep asking and challenging our teams and each other about. That's so important. So our next question is from Lisa. Ken, I really admire your passion and commitment to helping our unhoused neighbors. Are there any misconceptions about your tiny home communities that you would like to dispel?
Yes, because I've been on more Zoom calls than I ever thought was possible, mostly with neighborhood councils and individuals that I understand that they're concerned, they're afraid. The first concern is if you bring that in here, it's going to drive down our property values. And it's not true. What's driving down your property values is when people don't have a place to be and they're urinating and defecating and using around our residential and businesses. It actually increases the value when you can bring people off the streets and treat them like human beings and give them the basic resources that they need to rebuild their lives. So that's, one is that property values are going to go down, and the other is that, you're going to be, you're going to be inviting people from all over the city to come and then just camp out or you're going to increase our homeless population. That's not true either. It's been very, the people that come into the site, they have to live within a 3-mile radius. It is very specific, and the city council members make sure of that because they're the ones that put their political necks out on the line as well. And they want to know if they're going to put their neck out on the line that the prioritization is going towards those who live in that area. And basically through geocodes, we're able to determine, has someone really been homeless in that area? Because anytime an outreach worker, has an engagement with someone who's homeless, they're making a note to where that person is. And so let's just say, we're opening up a site in Reseda, and someone says, yep, I've been homeless in Reseda the last 3 years. Well, we can tell that that's not true. They were actually homeless, maybe in Santa Monica. And so at least the way the system is right now, that they would not be prioritized. The prioritization goes to those who live local. The other misconceptions is that you're disincentivizing people to better themselves, and nothing could be further from the truth. When people are living on the streets, they're not living, they're surviving. Where am I going to go to the bathroom? What am I going to eat? How do I protect myself? It's amazing what people are capable of when all of a sudden they feel secure, they feel safe, they don't feel threatened, and so instead of the mind spending its time on how do I survive, the mind can then think forward, how can I build a life? And so I'd say those are probably the top 3 misconceptions that I'm constantly addressing on Zoom calls.
I'm sure you get those all the time. We have another important one actually from Kristen that's in the same vein, and I hear this one all the time. In the creation of tiny homes, how has that affected positively or negatively the potential for PSH developments in the same communities? And then in parentheses, she's clarifying, just addressing the concerns that money into tiny homes can distract or pull money from permanent housing solutions.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot also, and I think that's something that we have to constantly look at. And that's why you'll hear me say again and again that the streets cannot be the waiting room for permanent housing any more than if I had hypothermia, you would tell me to wait in the snow until the doctor could see me. We don't treat people that way. So to me, it's not either or, it's yes and. Of course, the priority must be given to the end solution, which is the permanent housing, but we can't not address the issue of people languishing on the streets when there is an interim solution. And so, you know, I mean, to me, again, to say, well, you know what, let's not spend money on an interim solution because, you know, it takes away from the permanent solution. That's easy for you and me to say. We get to go home tonight. Okay, I have a home, I have a bed, I have air conditioning, I have a dwelling place. But when you're languishing on the streets, it's like, you know, imagine being an outreach worker. Okay, and you're going out and you're saying, listen, I got great news for you. They passed Triple H. We have $1.2 billion. We're gonna build the housing. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, and then it takes 4 years to get the first one open. Would you want to be one of those people that's waiting through the winters, the summers, the heat, the cold, the danger, living on the streets until that first one was built? I think that there's a humane process whereby we can address both issues, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Thank you so much for that. We absolutely share your view. And so we have our next question from Monica, who says, I really appreciate your devotion for filling such an important need. Who or what other organizations have been your most important and beneficial partnerships over the years?
Well, I mean, the city of Los Angeles has been huge. LASA, of course, putting out the RFPs and us being able to compete for that. But in terms of other service providers, LA Family Housing has been a tremendous resource. They, you know, because of the fact that we're pretty young, and so, you know, being part of this continuum of care here in SPA 2, it was very, very instrumental. And then, you know, Tarzana Treatment Center on the treatment side, it has been tremendous, and also the Department of Public or Mental Health Services, and then other organizations that even deal with the pets and the animals, you know, the veterinary care, you know, so one of the things that I really appreciate now more than ever, when I first started Hope of the Valley, it seemed to be a little bit more competitive, and people were in silos. And then, you know, with really the formation of the service providers and the lead agencies, and part of the requirements of the lead agencies was to, let's cast a wide net, let's have a big tent, let's bring everybody in, so that, because it takes all of us working together. And I can say, you know, I see that happening in Los Angeles, and you know, we're stronger together when we work together, when we can appreciate each other's differences, and value each other's strengths. And so, you know, we work very closely with just a plethora of other organizations, and you know, together we're better.
Thank you so much for that. The last question that we have from the chat, and I think you addressed this when you mentioned Boyle Heights and South LA and some of your other locations, but if you could just maybe expand on it. Due to the radius constraint in San Fernando, are there any other planned tiny homes being developed in Greater LA?
Yeah, there are. Like the one in Highland Park, that one should be opening in September, and that's in Councilman Kevin De Leon's district. So we've been working very closely with him. I know Baldwin Park, they're going to be opening one. Eagle Rock is opening one. I have seen plans for at least 12 more that are either in the planning stage or in the early building stage, and I've been involved in conversations with a lot of other ones. You know, one of the, I kind of liken homeless services to, you can have two models. You could have a stadium model or a Starbucks model, and a stadium is where everybody comes together. Okay. And unfortunately, in homeless services, we've had that in Skid Row, where it's like everyone just send everybody to the stadium, send them to Skid Row, and that's not right. And because people come from various communities and they need to be able to be in their communities, whereas a Starbucks model is they're everywhere. And it's so much more effective when we can have outposts in every community, a place where people can get help, they can get housed, they can get health care. And so, you know, that's really what we would want to see, is that every community, many hands makes light lifting. And when we can all work together, that we would see tiny tiny homes in every community while they're needed. And when they're not needed, let's disassemble them. Let's send them someplace else where they'd be better used.
What a terrific vision to wrap up on. And, you know, I know that a lot of our team members on the call today are actively engaged in leasing up, you know, our existing portfolio for when folks move on. And then we do, as Lee mentioned at the top of the call, have a lot of new units coming online. So we're so happy to have the connection with you, and we'll look forward to connecting our team to Hope of the Valley and partnering in CD14 and elsewhere.
That's great. And thank you again for the opportunity to share what's going on with Hope of the Valley.
Thanks so much for being here today. We really appreciate it, Ken.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.